Was it my imagination working overtime again? Or did we make a strange connection just then? Some things are never spoken, some things are never done. But if we could forget our manners, just once. Hello to you both and welcome to New Musical Shares, a post-punk podcast. I am Jay Cridford. It's been a while, but I'm delighted to be back. I've moved house and had a bunch of other things happen since my last episode, which was all the way back in October, would you believe, with Dorothy Max Pryor from Rima, Monochrome Set, The Ants, and so on. I'm really glad to be back in the saddle. Please share this episode and leave a comment. Subscribe if you like what you hear/see. I'm still not sure. This is my first time on camera for this. I'm still not sure for how long I'm going to appear on camera. This is a brave and uncomfortable new world for me, but we'll see. This episode's guest, let's get straight down to it because I'm really excited with this one. This episode's guest is best known to some of us as the bass player in Sheffield post-punk band the Comsat Angels. To others, he's best known as a record producer and for his partnership with Jonathan Quarmby under the moniker Bacon Quarmby. He's worked with numerous artists, advocacy organisations, and is a lifelong technology enthusiast who continues to develop and create innovative digital solutions for both the creative and remunerative aspects of music. So without further ado, here's Kevin Bacon. So thank you very much for doing this. How are you today? What have you been up to?
Not a lot of music today, unfortunately. Maybe after this I might listen to something, but yeah, pretty boring really. My days nowadays spend a lot of time talking, and I don't like that. I like doing stuff. So
Sure.
yeah, but not bad.
No, good. And thank you very much. With that in mind, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. It's because something that, as I've been kind of researching a bit more about what you've been doing over the last few years, something that's really struck me is how you've, I guess, the technological and practical aspects of music with you seem to have gone hand in hand all the way through what you've done. And but not only that, I was reading about the stuff you've done with kind of advocacy and values in the music industry and how you've looked at finding ways for artists to actually stay in control of their creativity, stay in control of their art, and actually kind of get some sort of benefit financially out of that, and in terms of the support that's on offer out there. And obviously, that's quite a crucial topic at the moment because with things like YouTube and TikTok and other non-traditional platforms becoming the way to make revenue in music, I thought that would be quite an interesting place to start. And obviously, the kind of main drive of my podcast really is to talk about post-punk, that period, and the fantastic work that was done by all these artists, the Comsat Angels included. Been a favourite band of mine for a very long time, and it's sort of a band that I always beat people over the head with how great they are if they've not heard them before. But yeah, I thought reading a little bit about what you've been doing with things like family music, contour music, ochre, I thought that would be quite an interesting place to start, if that's okay with you.
I've always been interested in technology. I remember I nearly glued my eyelids to my eyeball one day when I was messing around trying to get a Lego, but build my own Lego propeller using super glue and spun it, and it spun out and whizzed me in the eye. So I've always realized that technology is not always a good thing when it comes to the creator. And I think that certainly in the last probably 10 to 15 years, technology hasn't done any favors for the creator, the artist, the writer, whatever you want to put it, when it comes to getting paid.
Right.
It's created, more ways to do things for more
Sure.
people to do things. But it's kind of pushed people away. And I don't believe in the complete opposite. I don't believe that like total freedom, access to technology, everything is a great thing either, because like most of the music that everybody's kind of exposed to nowadays is, and it's obviously opinionated, but it's like it's 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 still crap, just like it always was. Most
Yeah,
most bands are crap, and most songs are crap, and so I don't believe like technology is an excuse to allow people to be more crap. And I also, when it comes down to this idea of like the DIY artist of being like, this great thing. I mean, artists have never been very good at working on their own. And unless you're really exceptional, everybody needs people and opinion in their life. And that sometimes costs money. And so, but what I do believe is if you do something good, then you should have at least a good chance of getting paid for it. It's as simple as that.
yeah.
I mean, I've never understood why I can go down and I was working with an artist when I was in my production period, and we were working in Africa in Mali, and on the last day we left and we drove through the desert literally to found this river we were taken to, we didn't find it. And I made a phone call home, and it was like perfectly crystal clear. And within, 2 seconds of me finishing the phone, it had said that call had cost me like £13.41. And I was thinking, well, if phone companies can do that, then why can't that be reversed for creators? Okay, I don't have to get paid I don't have to get paid in 2 seconds, but like there's this kind of weird veil that comes down, which is this, oh, you don't know how hard it is. And I don't believe it is that hard nowadays for people to get properly paid. I mean, I know why they don't, and I understand that side of the fence too. So yeah, I've always been interested in nuts, bolts, screwdrivers, Python code, AI.
AI is obviously a big one at the moment because there's now this whole idea of, um, you know, who owns AI generated music, and that's a question that obviously requires a big answer, way bigger than we could probably cover here, and that would be a series in its own right, I would think. But I think the thing for me is, I think these things are great when they're used as tools rather than something to be relied upon. I don't know how you think about things like that.
I'm loving AI at the moment. There's a ton of hype, and of course now everybody's got AI everywhere. And but a really good friend of mine, he's a amazing software developer, Chris, and he's been working in AI for quite a few years, way before people started talking about it. And we've been looking at it in many ways, and there are ways that are phenomenally exciting, and then there are just things that are just phenomenally boring. And one of those is like AI created music. I mean, right, it's good for a technical exercise, but there's much more exciting uses of
Sure.
AI than creating another round of shit music. I mean, I listen to about 6 to 7 to maybe 8 hours of music a day.
Right.
And a large part of that's in a 24-hour period. And a large part of that, I wouldn't mind if it was generated by AI, really, because it just kind of sits in the background and kind of noodles away. And, I don't have a problem with that. I think people are a bit, there's always the hype thing and it settles down. I think one of the really nicest things that we did with AWOL was the very first thing that we did. And we set up AWOL in 2004. And
Yeah.
yeah, we had no idea. We started it with £1,500, and we wondered how we were ever going to pay the rent, which I think was £300 a month in Sheffield for the
Right.
office, let alone pay for Paul to run it. Um, but um, but we didn't realize. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing. But one of the things that we did do, almost by mistake, which was fantastic, was that at that time, if you wanted to, if you were in the UK and you wanted to distribute your music digitally, you had to go to a traditional distributor,
Sure.
and the shortest contract you could sign was 2 years, and it was 58 pages, and there was like deductions for warehousing and stuff like that. Or you had to go to America and sign a 68-page contract with Warner's, and what we did, we got in there really early, and we said, let's do this really simple. Let's have no term. You can go whenever you want, and it's a one-page agreement. And we struggled, and we got it down to a one-page agreement. And I think that was like, there's no technology in that. That was just like, that was like the best thing we ever did, was create the one-page
Yeah.
agreement and the 0-day term. And that's why we had the Arctic Monkeys and Radiohead on AWOL.
It's so I was reading about AWOL earlier on, and when I read that 2004 was when that started, that was right about the time that there was that real paradigm shift in the way the industry was run and the way people began to listen to music and consume and find music in a different way. I was 14 at the time, and I remember that was around about the time they weren't stopping buying CDs, but there was definitely a shift. It's when, things like LimeWire and Pirate Bay and all those kinds of things started to appear. So you were in there super early, and things that people take for granted now, Bandcamp being the big one, I suppose, for platforms like this. I can't quite fathom how early you were, and like you say, the artists that you had on the roster, they're not nobodies,
Yeah. I mean, we started, AWOL started in parallel with iTunes starting in Europe. And we were really lucky. We had a great relationship, thanks to Dental, one of our founders, with Apple. And funny enough, one of the reasons that it really worked for us was that when they launched, they wanted to be associated with cool record people, because they were talking to major labels and having a difficult time. So they thought, maybe we need to just talk to really cool producers and cool record labels. And so that's how we got in, and they trusted us, and we gave them something really good in the first, early on. We found some great things, and we introduced comedy, believe it or not, to iTunes. We had like Eddie Izzard and Ross Noble and all pieces like that, and we did more downloads with. I mean, Eddie Izzard was completely responsible for us being able to survive the first 2 years. We got by on Eddie Izzard.
It's really funny because I remember there was Eddie's obviously been on the circuit for decades, hasn't he? But he had a real resurgence in the mid 2000s, and I remember that, even as a 14, 15-year-old at the time, he was everywhere for a period.
Yeah, I mean, it was great, and then, when we, later on when Spotify came along, I was like, someone came into the office and said, oh, you can have this and it's free. And I was like, whoa, I can see why free puts a smile on your face, but it didn't really put a smile on my face. And, I'm not, if you catch me on a different day, I might tell you that I think Spotify got it completely wrong, didn't understand the business. The record labels took their revenge out on them because they couldn't get control of Apple, because they got away with it.
Yeah.
And I think Spotify's been crippled from day one by being controlled by the major labels, but also I mean, it sounds crazy, but like they didn't really understand that you had to pay the writers. And I was horrified in the early days, as even with Apple, when we were uploading tracks and nobody was asking for the writers' names or the producers, and I was like, this is kind of running away with it. I'm no Santa Claus, or Santa Claus, as they say in Finland, apparently. um, in this, but like I have and I still am trying to put creators, artists in the flow of where they can get paid. And what they do have over the industry giants is they have the advantage of being creative and agile. And 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 if you let, like at the moment, everybody is obsessed with stream count and users,
Yep.
monthly listeners. And
Yep.
actually, that leads 99.9% of people nowhere. So people need to think about how I generally think, which is where the ochre conversation plays a part, is that there's a big shift in the industry coming now where everybody's talking about direct to fan, direct to fan, direct to fan, direct to fan. And of course, the best direct to fan experience is going to a gig. It's not new. And the old business of direct to fan, which was like either selling stuff, merchandise at gigs or sending people to RobbieWilliams.com, was kind of, a bit of the old business. But, what streaming's done now is opened up this new space where you can interact with people on streaming platforms in a direct to fan way through their marketplaces and opportunities. And, the one thing that I welcome about direct to fan is that the opportunities to make money are huge. I would suggest to any band, forget stream count, get 50 fans, get 100 fans, build on it, get 150 fans. Treat streaming purely as marketing reach and forget it as a revenue stream, because they forgot you years ago when it came to paying you. So like, don't believe the hype. You'll never make money from streaming unless you're in the thin echelon of like super artists.
Well, that's it. I think streaming has created. I think it was Rick Beato did a video on this quite recently. Another producer turned YouTuber. There's quite a few of them out there at the moment. So they're saying that it's created a very siloed industry, and I sort of got what he was saying insofar as, like you've said, streaming is a marketing tool, and so it's only these very few kind of really already fairly established people that benefit from that. And I think the direct to fan experience, like you said, nothing beats going to a gig for that. And I think in a way that's why Bandcamp became this kind of utopia for a lot of people.
I love
Certainly for my generation of people starting bands in their 20s, because that came along, I can't remember exactly when it first sort of came to prominence, but it was over 10 years ago. And it was essentially like being at somebody's merchandise stand, except they weren't stood in front of you. And it removed all the barriers to entry for people on both sides. I work in marketing myself, and it was just like, I remember seeing this for the first time, thinking, this is brilliant, and so I understand why, when it was acquired by a larger company last year, a lot of people were quite worried that there was going to be this critical mass point and something was going to change, and I do understand that. And I wonder, from your point of view, with something like Bandcamp, is that a sustainable model long term, do you think?
Ooh. It's a bit opaque at the moment.
Sure.
I mean, they went into Epic.
That's right, yeah.
And I was very excited about the idea of Bandcamp, reaching audiences, which it kind of did in a way through Fortnite. And but then it came back out again, and it's gone into this weird place. I forget where it's gone to. And then yesterday, I see Disney basically bought Epic Games or put 21 billion into it or something. So who knows? I mean, I do worry for them. I don't follow them that closely just because I'm just not in that space. But I really like them, but it's time for a bit of a shake-up and a bit of a new thing. And also, it's a bit of a wake-up call for artists. I'm really hard on artists. I was hard on myself when I was in the band, I was hard on every other band that I saw unless they were great. And as a record producer, I only wanted like I am all up for like harsh filtering and stuff. And I want artists to do stuff and I want artists to work harder. And I think a lot of people have been, you know, led down this path where basically, the rich are just robbing the poor.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy um this new thing with the what's called artist centric
Mm.
splits. It's label centric because most of the money goes to the labels because most artists on labels are unrecouped. So this goes to benefit labels. Labels get more money from the artists that need it the most. Um, if you're looking for some strap lines to stick in your podcast, I think if this industry was regulated, half the people in the music industry would be in prison.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the only reason it's not regulated is because it's not big enough. People should be doing better when they're in the position of being able to do better. And I think the DSPs could do better. And I think some DSPs are capable of being better than others. DSPs being, the streaming platforms.
Sure.
So I'm not anti-streaming at all. I think it is great, but it is not what everybody thinks it is.
Yeah, and I think as well, there's a lot of talk now about how most independent artists who are without label support have to rely on many, many kind of quite diffuse in some ways streams of income. But then you could argue, I think, that it's maybe always been a bit like that, and I think
Yeah.
it's not talked about a lot nowadays. But I think quietly in the background, PRS have always been very important for that.
Yeah, they are. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm not quite sure what the PRS's business is because it's an, not-for-profit organization, which sounds like it would be really helpful, but that means that they never have any profits.
Sure.
So they can't invest. So they have to go to the board to get the board to agree. And of course, the board is controlled by, up to a large extent, the major music groups. So, the PRS do a great job of collecting money. But I mean, I'm just going to give you pick any number you want. It doesn't really matter. They're all massive. Let's say 100,000 tracks delivered to the DSPs every day.
Yeah.
Some say it's 150, whatever. Let's say 100. On all those tracks, there's at least one songwriter, and the average is 4. So for every 100,000 songs generated, there are another 400,000 rights agreements created every day. And almost none of those go through any PROs.
Right.
And if you're not a member of a PRO, believe me, you won't get paid. And if you join a PRO and you don't have streams above a certain threshold, you won't get paid anyway. So yes, they do a great job. And if you're above a certain threshold, I've been a PRS member since 1981. When we were in the band, going back to the band, we joined the PRS because we had radio play on Radio 1, and our manager was like, you need to join PRS because and that money from PRS, from our first singles in 1980, we all 3 of us lived together in a house, and Andy lived down the road, and that paid our electricity and telephone bills. So it's like, that's what PRS. I've still got a wall chart from 1980 showing the dates when we went into the studio, which was early January, the release dates of the first single and second single, and then the album release date and the tour, and interspaced into it was these things that say 50p, and that's when each of us put 50p in the gas meter. That was 1980.
That's incredible. So back then, PRS was a big part of your revenue stream.
Yeah.
Wow. That leads me quite neatly on to talking about that period. But if we wind the clock back a little bit before then, and about your initial interest in music, which sounds like it hasn't wavered in terms of how much you listen to. Tell me about how you started getting into music. You mentioned you were always interested in technology. Did those two always go hand in hand?
Yeah, I've actually traced this back almost like like a therapy. My my dad didn't care much for music. He liked
Right.
brass bands and Winifred Atwell. I heard Winifred Atwell talked about on the radio the other day. I think Elton John was into Winifred Atwell.
That might
Uh,
be why I know them. My mum is a huge Elton John fan, so I heard those kind of crucial Elton John
yeah,
records from a young age, and I'm sure he might name check her
I
in
think
one
he
of
does
the
do. Yeah,
sleeves.
I think he does do. And my dad was into Winifred Atwell and brass bands and or military bands. Not a great music guy. And my mum was loved music and she did all the things. And it was in the early 60s. And we had a radiogram and it had a sliding door. And if I put my head inside it and closed the door as much as I could, it was louder because then my dad didn't complain as much. And it had a fantastic smell of like ozony electric smell. And then I used to have my head in there. And also that's where we kept all the album sleeves. So I used to stick my head in a wooden box and listen to music and smell it as well. And I think I got so into it. I used to listen to music and try and imagine that I could play. And then I used to go to my dad's garage and set up all these battery chargers and pretend they were amplifiers or something. And I was in a studio. But actually, like I kind of said it's embarrassing, but I was kind of secretly proud of it. Actually, the reason that I really wanted to be in a band was it wasn't the Beatles or the Stones. It was actually the Monkeys. And
But
because,
I think that's a great model. You know, you have wacky adventures, you write
yeah,
great songs.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there couldn't have been anything. And you're right, the music was great. I mean, obviously, because I had like great writers and
Yeah,
great bands. I mean, it was the what's it the LA session band, and I just thought, you know what, I want to do that. That just looks great. And I came from a town called Alfreton, Derbyshire. And I'm not bragging. I still think that I'm probably still the most famous person in that town, and that is how sad it is. Like, nearly everybody I know still lives there. They work at, if I carried on living there and I didn't leave town and go to Sheffield, probably would have been at, working at the ICI dye factory up the road. My mates worked at the milk marketing board. The Monkeys initially was like, I want to get out of here. I want to be on that beach. And then, like some weird fast forward movie, I spent a lot of time in LA. And when I've got spare time, I go up and hang out on the beaches where they did all those
yeah.
film shoots. I actually made it to Zuma Beach. And I just, yeah. So that was like a high point for me, was actually making it there. But yeah, I was that. And then obviously, as music, I got older, I got, because of the town where we lived, and I used to hang out with kids who were older than me, and they used to give me their Deep Purple and Pink Floyd albums and Wishbone Ash.
Sure.
And I kind of get into that. And I got into a band really early. I picked up a bass. I bought a bass because I was going to be in a band with my mate, and he bought a guitar before I could. So I bought a bass, and we got a band together. And I think we were called, the first band we were in was called New York Connection, and that was
Yeah,
the B-side of a Sweet track. I think it's the B-side of Ballroom Blitz, is a track called New York Connection. And we called ourselves that. And we did a couple of gigs, and then we joined another band. And then, by the time I was 15, I was kind of hanging around in working men's clubs, doing 2, 3 gigs a week. And we made money, and we bought a van, and we had a PA, and it was all really interesting. And then my school got really pissed off with me because I was doing A levels. The science teacher was borrowing our PA because our PA was really good and he had a
yeah,
dance band. But they came down on me, and they set me up with my mum for me to do so many A levels I wouldn't have time to be in a band. So they set me off doing, I remember it, it was A level chemistry, physics, applied maths, pure maths, technical drawing, and general studies. So if anybody knows what an A level is, that's a lot of work. Anyway, I lasted 5 months and just left.
yeah.
And then I found I lived in Alfreton, which is 25 miles away from Sheffield. My dad was obsessed with small ads.
Yeah.
And he came back one day. He'd been traveling. He came back with a Sheffield Telegraph, and I just read it after he'd finished it, and I saw an advert, and it said serious bass player wanted for serious band, must be into odd time signatures. And the name of the band was Mrs. Tibbets, and there was a telephone number. And my mum's first words of advice were, "Oh, you don't want to be doing signing anything, as in odd time signatures." Um, and I went, and I left, took my bass, joined the band. They were all older than me. They were at art college or catering college, one of them. And then I just went there, and I spent probably 4 nights a week for 10 months, sleeping underneath the Fender Rhodes in the rehearsal room in a purple nylon sleeping bag with a cream lining.
So, I mean, to be honest, it sounds like you had a really quite active musical life pre-punk. What did punk kind of? Were you into punk when it came out? Did you recognize the kind of possibilities of it?
Yeah,
Because
I mean, you've got to
obviously,
remember back then, like the distance between London and the north was massive
yep,
in terms of music. I mean, it's ridiculous. You know, it was like 6 months behind because it was 150 miles away. It was
yeah,
crazy. But yeah, I mean, I can't undervalue the impact of like listening to John Peel. So John Peel, when I started listening to John Peel, he was playing Weather Report, and within 6 months, he was playing television, and I went to see a few gigs. I went to see television, and I think that was with Blondie supporting them. I was super impressed. They only had blue lights, and then, and yeah, I mean, we got into punk gently. I was a bit dubious about bands like Ian Jury and the Blockheads because they used to be Kilburn and the High Roads, and they were just a pub band.
mm,
So I also thought there was a bunch of scammers. By the way, I mean, I thought that album was amazing, by the way,
yeah.
but and I didn't quite understand Elvis Costello, but again, I loved these records. So it was a bit of a weird time, but gradually it seeped up. But there was one massive turning. I mean, the band wasn't called the Comsat Angels; it had a different name. Now I think it's called like Radio Earth or something. And we did some demos. We did loads of demos and had hilarious experiences trying to get a record deal. Like me and Mick went to London, stayed with his sister, and we took this reel to reel down. No, we took the reel to reel tape down,
Yep.
and we'd recorded it on what's called a 4-track, 2-track machine. And when we played it down in the A&R offices, what it did is it played our track forwards at normal speed, and it played the other music that we thought we'd erased off it backwards at half speed. And it's like, yeah, and this guy must have thought we were like the weirdest band ever. And he just said, that's not what we're looking for. So we had like a bunch of laughs and disasters. But then there was a record label called Radar Records, and they got in touch with us, and they were like super cool label. That
Yeah.
was like Elvis Costello's. They had the best logo ever, still a great logo. Jake Riviera. We went to the studio. We did some stuff. We all thought it was going to happen. We talked about an album deal, and it didn't happen. But around that time, we went to Newcastle, and we went on stage, and we played with a band that just changed everything for us, and that was like Perubu.
Yeah.
And after that gig, we just drove back down to London, and our manager's Saab. We just went, that's it. We split up. And then 2 days later, we got together and said, right, we just need to do this in a different way. And we built this technique that we used to call Jarvis. Funny enough, way before Jarvis ever existed, because it was the name of a Rotherham bus company.
Yeah.
Jarvis Coaches. I don't know why Mick came from Rotherham. Anyway, we used to call it Jarvis. And what it was Steve would often appear with the song that he would play on guitar. And then the three of us, Andy, Mick, and Steve, we would play like the most damning minimalist thing we could play to it, on purposely
Yeah.
the most deconstructed. And then we'd take away Steve's guitar, and then we'd have this song over this weird deconstruction that was like probably very typical, like Total War. That used to be a "We Walk the Street Together," and of course in the end it just sounds like this stark landscape.
Yeah.
And we learned deconstruction and reconstruction from Perubu, and actually that thinking has had an imprint on all the good records that I made as a record producer.
That's really interesting because I think that idea of deconstruction as well, I think is very, it's something that the post-punk period really, I kind of, I'm, musicians did this prior, but I think so many bands took cues from, like you say, people like Perubu who were just masters of that. And there's a great quote from Jim Thirlwell from Fetus saying that if punk was the Big Bang, then let me try and remember this. If punk was the Big Bang, then what came after was the expansion of the universe, and that sort of idea that punk kind of was a little old-fashioned in its way, and then the kind of wave of bands after that were just like, right, let's push the envelope, let's see what we can do that's a little bit left of center. I mean, looking at the bands that came out of Sheffield around that time, there's so much variety. And so many of these bands, sadly, really don't get mentioned in the same way as contemporaries from Manchester or London or, you know, some of the bigger cities. And I think it's criminal, really.
It's because we didn't really have that infrastructure
Yep.
from a superstructure. So like Manchester had Granada TV, and
Yes.
therefore you had people that were getting paid from one area, but were able to bring things in. There was like kind of like that, osmosis that kind of went on, and same thing to a bit of an extent with Leeds, but Manchester and London. We Sheffield suffered badly because we never really had that. Everybody in Sheffield had to do it from hard up. So there was no leg ups. There were no Sheffield-based TV programs.
Yeah. That was something that I was watching an interview with, I think it was an interview, it might have even been his radio show. Mark Kermode, film critic, is famously a big fan of yours. And that's exactly what he said, is that Sheffield didn't have a Tony Wilson, for example.
Right. That's right. We did not. I think I might have told him that, actually. But yeah, that was a large part of it. And like all scenes, we were all like, oh, they're crap,
Yeah.
and we're better than them. And it wasn't just like it was in Manchester, but that there were so many more venues in Manchester. I used to go to Manchester a lot because I used to hang out I ended up hanging out in the Joy Division camp because there was a band I don't know, say it was a band that we knew really, really well, and they came to stay at our house. So it was a band called Mini Pops from Holland, and we did our first tour with them before we signed our first record deal. And they came back and they stayed at our house, and they put a single out on Factory, and they ended up on the Joy Division tour, and I went and did their front of house for them. I ended up doing Joy Division sound on a couple of nights as well, because when Ian came on late because of his problems, by that time Harry, the out front guy, was so drunk that he just used to push all the faders up. And but it was remarkable, like it was a different energy in Manchester. It was much more involved, and it had more energy as a town.
The interesting thing for me as well is Manchester had a sound. The band's kind of doing their own things within that, but they had a sound. You could say the same about Leeds, and I think you could say the same about Liverpool as well. Whereas Sheffield, there was so much variety in there, because on the one over here you had Cabaret Voltaire kind of pioneering all these industrial sounds, and on the other you had a band like 1000 Violins doing a little bit more of a jangly thing. You had the Comsats that were kind of between all of that, and ABC and Thompson Twins pre-pop. There was loads of stuff. Human League going on.
I mean, that was that kind of made a mess of things, actually, for a while. Not personally, and we ended up in we built the studio Phil and Human League built the studio next door to us, and so we lived side by side for a long time, and I love those guys. But it was quite weird because the one thing that I do love still about this industry is that it feels like an attainable business, and it still feels like an attainable business as an artist, because you still can be nobody and then massive.
Yeah.
And I think that is still one of the great things about music that I enjoy, is that idea, is that um, it's all achievable if you work hard and you're lucky. You've
Yeah.
got to kind of be bit of both. And every so often in a scene, like, you need something to come along like the Human League and go, look,
Yeah.
it can be done. Manchester had many, many examples of how that, like, they had Simply Red. There was that they always has done all the way through to Oasis. I mean, going back the Buzzcocks. There's they've had a lot of bands, and we didn't have that many bands. It was like most weeks on Top of the Pops for a long time to be a band from Manchester.
Yeah.
There was big gaps between bands from Sheffield. Tragic.
So you mentioned how you used to get it together with the Comsats. Talk to me about the period between Red Planet and Waiting for a Miracle, and how you started to build that up to the point where Frank Nielsen and Polydor came to be involved.
Yeah. Well, we had a manager. We had a manager who I can't remember how we met him, but we had a manager, Frank Silver, London based, managed other bands. And he managed us for a while, and then that deal didn't happen, and it was his Saab that we drove back in, and then he went away, and then we went into this deconstruction mode, and then we borrowed some money and we recorded Red Planet and we put it out, and then there's just this piece of magic that so many people have shared, and John Peel played it, and he played the A side, and he said, "That's so good, I'm going to turn it over and play the B side." And lucky for us, the B side had 2 tracks on it. So he played 3 tracks, and then we got a phone call from him. He actually called us from Leeds a couple of weeks later, but somebody from Radio 1 called us and said, "Would we do a Radio 1 session?" We went down and did a Radio 1 session, and between that radio play, we had 3 record companies, which was Polydor, a Warner's label, and Automatic Records, which was Doll by Doll's label. And we started negotiating a deal, and during that point, we're all on the dole. We all got kicked off. I had to take a job as a temporary gardener's labourer. We went to Holland for 6 weeks with this mini pops tour in September. And we came back and we had to like scrabble around for food because we had no money and no dole, and we signed a record deal in, I think it was December the 11th, 1979. And we got some money before Christmas. And then second week in January, we were in the studio in Stratford Place in London doing the album.
And that was done in 10 days, right, with Pete Wilson?
We did 10 days, and then we came back. So that was tracked and mixed in 10 days. And then we came back. We did like they gave us another 2 days to remix Independence Day and do something else. Can't remember what it was. So it was 12 days in total. Yeah. In the middle of the A&R department. Their studio was in the middle of the A&R department.
No pressure then at all. Did you have the songs pretty much worked out
Solid.
when you went in? Yeah.
100%. Just played them.
Yeah. So in terms of experimenting with sound and things like that, not really much room for that at this stage?
No, we did a few things. There's a couple of tracks that, let's say, I've got a production value, like On the Beach. But that was still like 90%. There was one track where we put guitar through the Leslie.
Yeah.
That was Pete's idea. Pretty much the only thing we overdubbed was vocals. Maybe a tiny bit of guitar every so often. I think we might have double tracked the guitar on Independence Day. I think we probably did. But like everything else, pretty darn stood in a room, played it. I can still see it now. I had a rugby shirt on. It was a rugby shirt from school. It had a red stripe on it. I had a Fender Precision bass, which I'd played blue, and I played it through the house bass amp, which was an Ampeg B15.
Wow.
I had round wound rotor sound strings. Steve, main guitar amp was his Selma Zodiac.
Yeah. And um was Independence Day always kind of earmarked as the single from that?
Yeah, I think even before we signed a record deal, we knew that song. That was a song when we did a few gigs, and that was the song that everybody came up to us. Funny enough, that and Total War was that was more music people, but we sort of knew it. I mean, we didn't know much, but we thought it was good, and I still enjoyed playing it like every night. We always used to moan about it, like every band does, but like it was great. And there's no bass on it to start with, and this is a thing that again I was so impressed by Andy Fraser from Free.
Mm.
And I so loved on All Right Now. All Right Now came about because that used to be the thing that they used to play at Soundcheck. And they didn't have a single. And somebody said, why don't you do that thing you do at Soundcheck? And Andy Fraser was a bit pissed off because he just thought it was crap. And he pretty much refused to play anything on the verse because it was mundane. And he comes in on the chorus and then he takes a bit of a bass solo in the middle. I thought, I'm going to do that.
I've got to say, Andy Fraser and Free generally, actually, I think especially nowadays, are really, really overlooked.
Oh, Andy Fraser's he plays with such confidence that it's just astounding. And I took a bit of Andy Fraser, and I've done it many times. I've stolen a bit of Andy Fraser. I wish I could play like him. He is like, that'll do for me.
I think it's the way he and Paul Kossoff interacted. They just seem to have this telepathic way of playing around each other and making the most of the fact that there only are the two instruments there. There's no other guitar player, And
he's also funny, the youngest guy in the band by far.
Yeah, long way.
But also probably one of the most experienced as well, because he was like playing in clubs. And I love the idea because Chris Blackwell wanted to call the band the Heavy Metal Kids, and everybody else agreed. And Andy Fraser said, "Fuck off."
That's great. I didn't know that actually. Independence. So you mentioned, the bass kind of takes a break, comes in, and when it does come in, it's like, right, it's on now. Because that's what I love about that song is that it almost feels tailor-made for radio, and yet it doesn't compromise. It still sounds like you guys doing what you do.
Yeah. Because there was the second version of that we did in our survival period, which was our Jive Records period. Yeah. That first album was we made some peculiar decisions, and at the end of that first album, we could have gone two ways. We could have gone like, even then, like clever pop, say like Simple Minds.
Yeah.
They were still like, they stood on the shoulders of punk, but actually, they went stadium. And then on or we could have gone darker. And we were more comfortable with going darker. And so we went darker. But the market went the opposite way.
Sure.
And so we got amazing reviews for our second album. And I mean, I love it, but like we went, so it wasn't a mistake creatively, because it's the second album is like an important part of the band, but like it narrowed our chance of being successful down. Amazing reviews, way better than the first album.
Yeah.
Terrible sleeve.
Because you had that fantastic sleeve on Waiting for a Miracle.
Yeah, I got about 5 years ago. Martin, the photographer, got in touch with me, and he actually sent me. I've got a special made print of just the photo.
Wow.
it's overlooking Parkway into Sheffield. So
Had he done anything to that, or was it just a quick capture and it just happened to turn out brilliantly?
and that's what there is the rear light of the car was too bright in the picture,
Yep.
so Steve put his hand over it, and that's the only thing in it. We did loads of photos that night. I mean, he's a great photographer, and
He is.
that was Steve's vision. And also so was the second album, which was fucking terrible.
I
But
mean, the the jump from Waiting for a Miracle to Sleep No More in terms of the songs, the production is obviously a real leap forward. But you within that time, you were also starting to produce. You produced a few singles
yeah.
for, The Disease, The Mirror Cracked. Was that starting to were you starting to get involved with the production of the Comsats in terms of having a bit more sway over what Pete was doing?
Well, we always we always had a lot of sway over what Pete did, especially first album. Like there was a massive. It would have had much more reverb on it and much more effects. So we stripped that first album down to an extent where we were a bit worried we'd stripped it down too much, and like we weren't doing much double tracking, and obviously it was like virtually no harmonies unless it was the ones Andy had worked out in the rehearsal room. Second album, we definitely brought in more techniques, and Pete brought some more techniques, and we kind of loved it. I mean, we did like set the drum kit up in a lift shaft. We had microphones on the next floor, and we did all this gating and kicked the side chains, a lot of stuff. Great fun, and it was like mental to play live. It was just like so exciting
Yeah.
on stage. But like we sort of we left a large part. Well, we just weren't attractive to the market, so we struggled. And then when we came to the third album, we tried to pull it back. That was a mistake. I mean, there's some really great tracks on there, like I Love After the Rain, and I love the way
Yeah.
that we put that together. And the bass line on there is fucking great. People don't even know it's bass. People think it's something else. They have no idea what it is. And great. But that's the first time on an album that there's tracks that I cringed over. And that was really quite hard to reconcile.
Yeah.
I wasn't very good at like that. I couldn't do it. And when we played some of that stuff live, I hated it. And some of it. And then we got dropped because we didn't have any sales. And then it was like, oh shit. And we're never going to get another record deal. And then so this next bit you can kind of blame on me. After we got dropped, there's a period of 4 and 5 months. And I had some friends with the studio, and we used to rehearse in that studio, and we used to write tracks, and I did the demos. Like it was 8 track, maybe 16 track, can't remember. And we did these amazing set of demos. They were great, but the reason we did them was because if we didn't get a record deal, we would have to pack tin.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to do that. So we did these new tracks, these new demos.
Were these songs that appeared on Land later?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. This Island Heart. Gosh, I can't remember the title. It'll come to me in a second. And we sent them out, and we got a couple of record companies interested. Funny enough, one of them was Island, and the other one was Jive.
Yeah.
And Jive jumped all over it, and they just had massive hit with Flock of Seagulls.
Sure.
And they just thought, put them in the studio with a Flock of Seagulls producer. That Independence Day's a hit. Re-record it, straight in the charts, no brainer.
Yeah.
And and we went for it, and we felt incredibly lucky and clever that we'd kind of, you know, fuck all you lot in Sheffield who said it was all over,
Yeah.
and you people in the enemy who turned on us by then, like, we'll show you. And like I say, it was our survival period. It was weird. I mean, we went to gigs, like loads of girls started being interested in us because we looked like a pop band and we sounded confident, and we were playing to bigger audiences in Europe. But it didn't happen. And it it was an accomplished record, but it's not one that I look back on and go, yeah. I mean, yeah, some good bits on it.
I mean,
And then
for me as a listener, listening to Land particularly more so than 7 Day Weekend, I think there's a sense of it still sounds like you guys, and there's some great songs on that. You know, Nature Trails is probably my favorite on Land.
yeah,
But it does sound, you sound confident, you sound energized, but there's something about it. Were Jive kind of in the background nudging you in a bit of a direction?
oh no, that record was produced by Mike Howlett.
Right.
That was like, we did not produce that record.
Yep.
We had, we came in with demos, and we came in with some like smart things that we used on the record, but basically we went in the studio, and when it was Mick's turn to come and program the drums, because a lot of the time the drums were programmed, he'd play the fills, and sometimes Andy wouldn't play the keyboards, and then so they'd have this keyboard player who'd turn up. It was not a happy period, and it was like, this record had better be a fucking hit, because this is shit. You know, as luck would have it, through completely bizarre chance, TV show, Robert Palmer goes on the Tube, and Paulie Yates says, "What are you listening to nowadays?" And Robert just says exactly what he thinks and what he should say, and he says, "I'm listening to a lot of Comsat Angels nowadays." And then that opened up like the next chapter, and it opened up the next chapter because we then started doing 7 Day Weekend. Well, it wasn't called 7 Day Weekend. It was, the record company came up with an idea of us working with James M. Toomey.
Yeah.
And that was fucking hilarious. So he was 2 weeks late when we finally met him. He'd like obviously not heard anything at all. He was at the studio. He was a talented blagger. We went in the studio. It was like all weird and stuff. And we did some tracks with him, and they were I don't know what they were. And that didn't work out. So then we went back in the studio and we did some more tracks, and then we did some more tracks, and then we were like, this isn't happening. And then the record company said, "Oh, we've got 10 tracks, we're going to put it out." And we were like, but because we were used to like recording an album.
Yeah, of course.
They were like, well, we need to put this out. And so we ended up with an album title and some photos, and I mean, we weren't exactly dragged and kicking and streaming. We had a chance to record some tracks for it, but essentially those tracks were going to come out.
And this was James M. Toomey, the jazz producer, worked with Miles Davis.
Yeah, I mean, most famously, he's known for Juicy Fruit, which of course is Juicy with Biggie Smalls.
Yeah.
The main thing. I mean, I think he died. I met him the year before we ever met him, but he couldn't remember. I met him in New York. But yeah, I think we did 2 or 3 tracks with him. Maybe just 2. I can't really remember. And then we did some tracks with Chris Tangarides, who was a Jive owned record producer.
Yeah.
That wasn't great.
Because that was the other thing I wanted to ask you. When I saw Chris's, because I've got a lot of records produced by Chris, metal records. So how he came to be invited, I just immediately saw that name and think that's not going to work.
No, that's because he was a house record producer, and they just wanted us to finish. So they didn't want to sit in the studio on our own.
Sure.
So they said, Chris Tangarides. I mean, I think we went in on a Saturday and recorded a track. I think it was Believe It or something like that. I think it was. and and then he mixed it about 7:30, and then said, "Oh, that's it, I'm off now." And I just went to the
Right.
control room, just listened to it, and I thought, "What the fuck is that?" So it was a lovely, 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 lovely guy, uh, but should never have been teamed up with us. I mean, he's
No,
made
sure.
loads of great records with other people, and it's no nothing on him. And then yeah, then they kind of put it out. Even around the time of Land, we'd started talking to Robert Palmer directly,
Yeah.
and and we had this mad idea. He wanted us to play on one of his records. 'Cause remember, he still hadn't made his Addicted to Love album, by the way. Um, he wanted he was going to produce us, and then we were going to like guest on some tracks for him. That was the idea.
Sure.
And he was super excited about well, about having us. He's a big fan of Steve's lyrics, and basically he loved the band. He loved mixed drumming and the rhythm section, and he really wanted to do something with us. He's an experimenter, and it was kind of dragging on. And what dragged on in the meantime was that Jive wanted us to do another album, a third album,
Right.
um, but which they had an option for. But they wanted to renegotiate it for a lot lower advance, and they wanted also to take a bigger chunk of our publishing, as record labels
Sure.
did. So they were of the opinion that we wouldn't be able to get a record deal anywhere else, and they also took their eye off the ball. So one Friday evening, I've got this bizarre memory. I was watching, I think it was Vic and Bob. The phone rings and it's Robert, and Robert's like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "Well, um, we'd love to come and do this, but at the moment we can't do anything because, we're just renegotiating the deal. But as soon as it's done," I said, "and weirdly at the moment we're actually out of contract." And he just said, "Well, why don't you sign to Ireland?" And I went, "Well, how do we go about doing that?" And he was like, "Well, I'll call Chris Blackwell now. It might take
Yeah.
him a couple of weeks to get back to you." Anyway, I put the phone down, sat down, phone rings. Chris Blackwell rings up and goes, "Robert says you're free and you can sign a contract with us. I really want you to sign. Let's do it tomorrow morning." So we closed the deal in the morning and then told Jive Records, and they weren't very happy. But so it goes.
I've got to say, I mean, it's not a popular opinion, I know, with 7 Day Weekend, but I do think there are some stellar songs on that. And I
Yeah,
think in the right hands, that album could have been quite different because when I listen to those songs now, there's still there's still the essence of what made you guys so great in the first place in there.
yeah,
There's just
totally
a
great.
different side to you.
Yeah,
And I think, you had the Real Genius soundtrack as well.
yeah.
You were on that. So other than, the studio experience aside and what was going on with Jive, was there still a fairly good feeling in the band?
Yeah, we were. I mean, everybody had a very definable character, and as you might expect,
Yeah.
but we all like this is probably not quite accurate, but basically, I'd say pretty much for like 10 years, we rehearsed every weekday from 1 till 5, and you pretty much needed a sick note from the doctor if you weren't there. I
Sure.
mean, we did that every day. That's what we did. It wasn't like, "Oh, go and do some other stuff and see you." It was like, that's what we do. And so we were always, and we used to have bust ups and fallouts and fucking all kinds of stuff. And we used to jam, and we had like a couple of ways of making songs. Steve's preferred way was we jam and then we come up with some like weird core idea, and then he'd take it away and then write on top of it and bring it back, and then we'd build on it again. Sometimes he used to come down with like songs, and then we'd try and jam arrangements around them, and that was like less productive. We loved getting stuck into a deconstructed
Yeah.
or, or something. So yeah, and so the songs were still mainly there. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, Steve is a fantastic, amazing songwriter. Now when I go back and listen to Independence Day and listen to just to the lyrics, and even to I mean, it was weird at the time because I knew exactly what the lyrics were about, and I found them a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But like, it's one of the great shames that people. It's actually a thing for me that I'm actually working on at the moment. Is that most people's lyrics are just shit as well,
Yeah.
and Steve to a large extent was like great at that kind of lyric and the songwriting. Steve was like we going back to like between the first and second album. We toured with U2, and
Yes.
we did what was called a dual headline tour, but they headlined every night because they were bigger than us. But it was like it was a nice thing to do, and you could arguably say that from that point onwards, we were similar in stature. They were actually bigger than us, but similar. And the thing is, they didn't want to be. Put it this way: Bono's strengths are a major driving force in why the band are popular.
Yeah.
That desire to be undeniably famous, or whatever the word is, an amazing entertainer, or whatever that is that drives Bono, is what made them successful. Steve didn't really have that same drive, um, and but it didn't stop him. That's one of his strong points because he wasn't drawn down the route of trying to be popular. But it was like it meant that he always had an integrity in his songwriting. He applied his principles to songwriting, which has stood the test of time. So I agree with you. Yeah, there are some songs. There's also a couple of cringes.
When you got to Ireland and started work on Chasing Shadows, how did that feel in comparison to what you'd just done? Because listening to that record now, it's probably my favourite of the Comsats albums because I think it strikes this fantastic balance between it's very well produced, it's got the darkness of the early records, but it sharpens up some of the arrangements, and I think there's just my favourite ballad, possibly of all time, is Lost Continent, which I just think is a wonderful song.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just wondered how you felt looking back on that now in comparison to what had just come. Was there a sense of like, okay, we're not starting afresh, but let's go
No,
forward here?
it was starting afresh. It was
Right.
like this is the third shot at it.
Yeah.
And even before we got dropped by Zomba, we'd already, because we always said we'd already started demoing stuff. And by that time, I was starting to get it together. And so we did like really fantastic demos of Carried Away, which actually was way better than the finished version. Lost Continent. I think some of these might be around somewhere. There's some great demos that we did, and then Ireland puts into a studio with an engineer, and it at Rockfield, and it actually was the first time where I thought I'm way better than this guy. This, but I had to keep the head down.
Yeah.
New record label, and we finished the album, and the guy mixed it, and it was rubbish. Actually, I shouldn't say that. It wasn't good enough, and we got and it wasn't great, and so Chris Blackwell hooked us up with a guy called Rob Fraboni who'd
Yeah.
been part of the band. He'd actually designed and built Shangri-La Studios in LA.
Oh, cool.
And we met up with him, and me and Steve went to the Bahamas to Compass Point,
Yeah.
and we did some reworks on the tracks, did some re-vocals, and we remixed the tracks there with Rob, and we took our demos for references. We got there, and when we started playing the demos back, this guy was like, "That demo's way better than this recording." And have you got the multi-track? And we hadn't, because we only got one reel of tape. So we'd recorded over everything to record the tracks because we were skint. But bizarrely, we went for dinner one night at Chris Blackwell's house, as you do. And over dinner, Rob Proboni said these guys should have their own studio. So after while we were finishing recording that first album, we built our own studio. Just goes to show you that owning your own studio doesn't necessarily immediately lead to the best things ever. But we had been cursed. We felt so sure that the name was so original.
Yeah.
When the communication satellite Comsat Incorporated started pursuing us, which was way back in 1983.
Yeah.
It had never gone away. And every record company said, don't worry about it, we'll sort it out. And then when everybody realized that this company was like making missile guidance systems for NASA, we had problems with the name in America. Like we couldn't tour with our own name in America. We had to come up with all these fucking CS Angels and stuff. And we had a run of bad luck. I hate to say that we weren't as successful as we should have been because of bad luck, because it's a pathetic excuse. But we did have some like bad luck. And making that record didn't enjoy the recording process as much. Like Cutting Edge was like a lovely kind of freedom track for us. It was just really nice. I remember we played that track and we just thought, I don't care what people think of it. This is just great.
The live performances from around this time, there's a few of them on YouTube. You're so tight and exciting. And my partner and I had them on the TV the other night. And the thing that struck me was how original you and Mick sounded as a rhythm section. I think Mick's drumming throughout the catalogue is stellar, and some of the drum patterns he comes out with are just so
mental,
outside the box.
Yeah.
And yet you can still tap your foot to them.
Yeah.
And then the way that Andy and Stephen harmonised, like Andy's harmonies with Steve are fantastic. And I think it might have been a live performance of Lost Continent or maybe Flying Dreams. I can't remember.
Was that from the Tube?
Yes, and you'd be forgiven for thinking they were tracked because they're so, you can tell they're not, but they're so perfect.
Yeah, we were definitely playing at our best then. I didn't love Flying Dreams. I didn't. That's one of the tracks that I didn't enjoy. Just me. I don't like Marmite. Some people do, allegedly. We were great. I mean, we were solid. I mean, we rehearsed so much. We played so much. I was kind of horrified when I met other bands and they didn't put the hours in.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap that period up, there's obviously the wrinkle in the fabric with Dream Command. Tell me about that period and when you started to get a sense that maybe you were being led away from being in the band and starting to think about a career outside that.
I'd produced a couple of things outside, but I kind of produced other people out of a large extent out of curiosity.
Sure.
And also testing myself, and also it's kind of easy to look good as a producer if you're working with the other guys at the band. It's like,
yeah.
So I was kind of doing stuff, but I was never thinking about it. Okay, I'm going to run and jump here. That didn't really happen until we started record. We did that Dream Command album, and Steve just really wanted to change the name. There was a bit of a pull in the band direction wise. I have an aversion to like what I call rock music in a negative way, which is distorted guitars, and because I just think that all that doesn't tell me that you're angry or cross or you've got an opinion. It just tells me you bought a fuzz box. I'd rather hear like on Real Story. One of my favorite guitar sounds ever is the guitar on Real Story,
Mm.
on first album,
Yeah.
because it's scratchy and like I felt that if we'd done that later, it would have had some a load of effects
Yeah.
and so when we started to get in and when I think Mick, by the way, I'm not. This is no blame passing around because we're all part of the same thing. I think there was a bit of a thing of like, well, we need to straighten things up a bit, and and there was a bit of a march towards it being a bit rocky. We definitely started to fall apart, and it got harder for Andy to be creative on keyboards because the space had gone. Um,
Had you met Jonathan Quarmby at this stage?
I met John. I'd become aware. I'll tell you, there was a thing that happened. We were in the studio one day. I was in the studio, and somebody came in and said, "Look, I've got a tape of this guy from Birmingham, and he's Wolverhampton, and he's absolutely amazing." And they played it to me, and I went, "Get him. We got it. It's like the most exciting thing I'd ever heard." And we brought him over, and it was a guy called Ephraim Lewis, and and there was a couple of writers with him, and we started doing some tracks. And this was at the end, and this was a completely different field. This was
Yeah.
like, and 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 John came in to use our studio with a band. He was producing a record, well, we were all producing it, a French artist. And he came in, and me and John met, and I played him the E-frame stuff, and he went, "Oh, can we work together on this stuff?" So we started
Yeah.
working together. So that was why, while the band was still together very early on. But then all kind of funny things started to happen. In fact, it's not so much 7 Day Weekend, as because we got dropped shortly after that.
Yeah.
And then we started making another record, and people started to become, it was harsh. And I think for the guys, and I think certainly as it turned out for Mick and Andy, the band was their lives apart from their private
Yeah,
lives.
of course.
That's what they were in the band, and then they went down the pub.
Sure.
And my life wasn't like that. Um, and um, and Steve's was. I mean, Steve was even more remote than that. He didn't even go down the pub. He just um, so when we went to make the album after 7 Day Weekend, when we were entirely on our own and in our own studio, we started doing stuff which was, some of it was really interesting. I mean, we did this track called "And All the Stars,"
Yeah.
and I just loved that track, mainly as well because I was trying to be Andy Fraser on it, and we did some great things, and we did some stuff, and we started to drift apart. But actually, we slogged through, and we finished that record. What was it called? That album,
After Drinking Up, My Mind's Eye was the
My
one.
Mind's Eye.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Drink Man was just it was just, it was all going wrong, and then I didn't feel like I fitted in a kind of
Yeah.
rock space. Or tell you what, if I did, I, I've I've got something that I say later, and it's a bit of a showy statement, and it's like, you know, I'm happy being the bass player in the band. I don't want to be the lead singer or the lead guitarist. But if I'm going to be the bass player in the band, I want to be the bass player in the biggest band
Of
in the,
course. Yeah.
and I lost that feeling that we could be the biggest band in the world.
Sure.
Um and also, what also happened is we were doing an American tour, I think on the end of at some point, and we were playing in Dallas, and I was backstage, and Tim, tour manager, came up and said, "Oh, we're on stage in 10 minutes," and I couldn't I couldn't tell the difference between being in the toilet, being backstage, and being on stage. I had no difference,
Yeah.
and I felt like an imposter. And I gradually started to feel a bit like an imposter
Right.
in the band. I suppose is the best way of saying it. So I didn't
Yeah.
go, okay, I'm going to go into record production. I actually felt like a bit of an imposter.
Mm.
Um, and then when me and John started working together, the my mind's eye, what happened was, in my opinion, Mick got very, very, very frustrated, and Mick actually left the band. We finished off my mind's eye. We got studio. We finished it
Yeah.
off,
Yeah.
and there was they did a lot of overdubs with our one of the house engineers, and they kind of mixed it. And then I got as a record a label came approached me to put it out, and it's like, great, well, we'll put my mind's eye out, but Mick wasn't in the band, and by that time, um, I'd started moving off into working with E-Frame and John, and also me and John had put out some very early electronic stuff, a track called Our Earth and some weirdy stuff, and then one day, I was doing a very small amount of acid uh, in my newly furbished loft at the house where I lived, and all the floors was just rippling up and down. And then Steve rang and he said, "Oh, I've got some news for you. Mick's going to come back into the band, but he's not. But he won't come back if you're in." So, so I was like, "Okay, fair enough."
Wow.
So I left, and so technically I was fired, asked to leave,
Yeah.
and Mick came back in. But like, it wasn't a problem for me because by that time, I really was on my way out. So we signed a record deal with E-Frame, and we were heading off. And I was making an early '90s R&B soul record for an
Yeah. I
American
mean,
record label.
looking at the records you produced around that time and throughout the 90s into the early 2000s, was there a conscious decision to kind of think, I'm done with rock music for a while?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I played a lot of bass with E-Frame because John's a really amazing keyboard player, and we had
Right.
some really good musicians in Sheffield. And we started bringing good musicians in, and like they're better bass players than me. I'm not. I'm a riff guy. I'm a sonic guy. I'm not a let's do jam this song in
Yeah.
F sharp minor. So we got some of the places. I actually, until we actually did the album, when we're doing a lot of his tracks, I didn't play bass. And then when it came to doing the album, Ephraim's first album, I ended up playing bass on 3-4 tracks and really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Um, but still on Ephraim's album, I was still trying to make a deconstructed
Sure.
album. I still had those values in my head. What excited me was space, and then that ability to let things shine in that space. And we made a great album for him, and it was moderately successful in America. He was incredibly successful as a singer, and then he died in LA when we were making the second album. um, and that was tragic. And then that plunged me and John into making. We sort of turned our back on everything. We made like a highly electronic jazz dub album called Manna for RNS Records, um, and at the same then we kind of I went to a gig one night, and I saw this band, a band of students essentially, and I saw this band called the Long Pigs, and I
Yeah.
just thought, they're amazing. Why don't you come into the studio and let's do some tracks? Uh, and On and On still has that track. On and On still has a very strong Comsats
Yeah.
thing to it. It has quite stark, unique, quite stark drums, not as deconstructed, but
They kind of came along in that interesting period between, you know, the kind of grunge and alt rock thing and what would come later with Britpop, and I think they kind of have slipped between the cracks a bit. But I've revisited that kind of before I actually got in touch with you about doing this. I revisited their catalogue quite recently. There's some stellar songs
oh,
on
it's
there.
amazing. I some of the stuff on the second album, I can't remember what it's called now, Mobile Home. Some amazing stuff. Some of my best ever production stuff on there. Um, and yeah, and then very shortly after that, I ended up doing this band called Audio Web, which they were super hot, and that was really exciting because that
Yeah.
was kind of one of my loves, which was like reggae and dub, and we were mixing live instruments with beats, and that was like really exciting. Um, and then this weird thing came out of the blue. Sony got in touch with us, mainly because the A&R guy loved that Ephraim Lewis's records.
Yeah.
And he got in touch with us and said, we've just signed this guy called Finley Quaye. I really want you to make the album. And Finley was a massive Joy Division fan. And even after all, on that track, in a weird way, is a deconstructed piece of music.
Yeah. See, I'd not listened. I was probably just too young for when that first came out to really appreciate it. Now I listened back to that today, and maybe it's because I had this in my head, so there's a degree of bias there. But no, I agree. There's the same sort of sense of space, and the sense that you never are quite sure where it's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
So, to kind of bring things towards a close, tell me about how the Comsats got back together in 2008, and your feelings around that time, and whether you kind of thought it was a good idea, not a good idea? Because I think so many bands from that time, from the 80s post-punk period, have reunited for, some for not very long, some are still together now after reuniting at a similar time. But you guys did it, I would say, maybe the right way. You played a few shows and disappeared again. How did
Well,
that come about?
okay, there's a Sheffield music festival called Sensoria, and for years they'd been asking whether we'd do a gig or not. And um, I think it's 2009, was it 2008, 2009?
Yeah,
And then I was like a few years into running AWOL then, and I got a bunch of people working in the office who were like all like early 20s, and there was a bit of like, well, I'll show you, in a band. And it was very difficult to get everybody to agree to do it, but we agreed to do it. But I said that I only want to play tracks off the first three albums.
yeah,
Um, and there was a bit of pushback, but it was like I want to make it something that's more than just doing a gig. I wanted to like, to chapterize it. I always like the way Factory put FAC, a serial number, against everything that they did, whether it was a venue or a release or a gig. So I had this idea that I want it to be something. And it was weird because when I left the band carried on My Mind's Eye and a couple of records afterwards, obviously,
yeah,
with this guy Terry playing bass, who plays with his fingers, and I play with my fingers, but those bass lines in the Comsats are not designed to be played with your fingers. You'll
sure,
snap your fucking fingers off. But so when we did the show, it was like, okay, let's do it, and it was really positive. And I thought, right, I'm going to do this. So I got the same bass that I played on the first two
yeah,
albums, first three albums. I got my same bass rig. I hired it in. I got exactly the same. I was right. If I'm going to do this, and let's do it. And then, Mark Como came, and we did a gig, and there was loads of people. But really, really, what happened, and I've got some photos from it. For the first rehearsal that I went to with them, I used to go up to Sheffield and stop over like a ponce and turning it. Oh yeah, I had a Maserati back then, like fucking Mr. Successful record producer. But we used to turn. I turned up and we went to this shabby rehearsal room, and the idea was we were going to have a chat and maybe play a couple of songs,
yeah,
and we just banged into 7 songs and just played them like just brilliantly, a few mistakes, and just played them, and it was like great, and it was really exciting, and they were like, oh, this is great, this is, it's great. So we did it, but it was supposed to be a one-off, and if we were going to do something else, I wanted it to be something a bit special. Like if we were
Yeah.
going to do another gig, I wanted to do a gig in London or or something. And because I got into marketing, but at the gig or just before the gig, the band got offered a tour of some dates, and I didn't want to do them, and I didn't want to do them for a couple of reasons. Was one, I couldn't afford the time.
Yeah.
Uh, Two, the gigs were quite small, and there wasn't going to be many people there, so there wasn't any money.
Right.
And also the band, which is a bit of a traitor there, and fair enough, they wanted to make as much money as possible, so they didn't want to have a crew.
Sure.
They were happy to have a driver and set up their own gear and load it on stage and drive back to Sheffield every night. So it would have meant I would have to have gone to Sheffield, stayed in a hotel, traveled to Glasgow, carried my own gear, packed it back in a van, gone back, stay in a hotel in Sheffield. And it's like, that's not, that doesn't feel like success to me.
Yeah.
So I couldn't do it. So they did it. I missed a bit out. I did when I did go and see them, like their first gig after a long time, after I'd left, a couple of years after I'd left, I went to see
Yeah.
them. And Terry was on stage, and I didn't have, oh, I wish I was on stage. It was like I was a bit like, oh, I'm glad I'm not up there. Um, and then when I saw them play in London on that tour that I didn't do, I kind of had the same feeling. I just thought,
Yeah.
oh, it could be like, it could be so much better. Like, get some of the old lights out or do something anyway. So I didn't have that. I'm glad I didn't do that tour. Um, and then they shut down. I think it was around 2017. And in that time, me and John had accrued like one of the best recording studios there was. We bought Abbey Road's Neve console. We collected synthesizers, guitar amps, guitars, everything. So, but me and John had stopped working together. Similar thing. I got out of record production because I just didn't enjoy it anymore. It didn't feel like success, so I got out. John still does it, he's still very successful at it. But in 2016, 17, maybe 18, we decided to sell all of our studio equipment to Rack Studios.
Sure.
And so I went to the band and said, look, why don't you come down to London for a few days, for a week, and you can stay in the apartment. We've got this amazing, beautiful apartment at the studio residential part. You don't even have to bring down any gear. We've got everything. We've got all the synths that we used to use. Tons of guitar amps, tons of guitars. Steve brought a guitar down, but actually ended up playing I see you've got a Gretsch Falcon in the background.
I have, yes. Yeah.
We got we've got this 1957 or 1958 Fender Stratocaster that used to belong to Mickey Most. So Steve ended up playing all that because he was just obsessed with it and just loved it. We had all these amps, and they came down for a week, and we recorded tracks. And I set up in the studio with exactly the same amplifiers as the first session that we did for the first album, and pretty much replicated it. Steve wrote down some songs. They were okay, but we had a great time during the tracks, and it was really good fun, and it felt really good. And I had a sneaky plan then, because what it was at that time, knew the people at Pledge, and I was like, if we get 3 tracks together, then they can do a Pledge album, and then raise enough money to make an album, and then the band can. And again, I wasn't being Santa Claus, but then the band can go on tour with the other bass player.
Yeah.
So I had this like long plan, and I didn't got my agent mate who was like, "Yeah, I'll put them first on the bill in Sao Paulo Music Festival." And we had a great week together, and then on the last night we went for dinner, and Steve did this very bizarre thing, which was like he said, "Oh, I'm not happy with the songwriting splits," and we had an argument about songwriting splits, and which for me was horrible because there was never going to be any money. It
Yeah,
was
of
just a
course.
horrible, but whatever. And then we did these recordings, and then we were going to finish them, and I've got them. And the idea was to go and do another album, and in my mind, but we didn't do it because when the album, it was the same time as there was all those re-releases on
Sure.
Beeman,
Yeah.
and there was some press around it, and Steve did some press, and it wasn't very nice. So I ended my relationship at that point. Fucking stupid, arguing over fucking pointless money that will never come from streaming. Back to our first point,
Yeah.
and this stupid thing that it does to people, imagining that people are going to make money out of
Yeah.
streaming music. And so we ended up falling out of it over dinner, which spilled over into this article. And I didn't particularly enjoy being referred to as our bass player. Um, so, but that's how things go. So it wasn't a great ending, but we could have we might have gone and done another album, but I didn't.
How are you guys now? Have you sorted it out or?
No, not really. Well, I'm not like walking around I'm not walking around hanging it
No,
over.
of course.
I speak to Mick. Mick lives up in Whitby. Last time I spoke to Andy, he's in Sheffield. I'm not sure what Steve's doing. Occasionally, I send him an email if there's any money from the Polydor albums.
Yeah.
Because I got that added to my account, and there was when we had the those vinyl albums. So actually,
Yeah.
after all these years, we actually recouped Polydor, the first three albums. No, I mean, no, I'm not really interested in going back into studio.
No, of
I'm not
course.
interested. I'm don't carrying it around. It's not like a problem, but
Yeah.
it was an unpleasant, unnecessary. It was an unnecessary end to it all. But yeah,
No, sure. And I think to kind of pull all this together and bring things to a close, what taking all of this stuff into account, we've kind of come full circle in terms of, like you said, brought it back to streaming again. Thinking back on all of these things, from the band, your production, working with direct to artists, direct to consumer platforms and things like that. What still drives you, and what, if you were to kind of give anybody advice on any of these things, what would you say?
wow. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm still day to day. Family music in Finland. It's a Finnish uh, platform for mainly for like new creators. You know, the words artists, songwriters, and all that kind of stuff. And still talking and working with artists every day. New artists, older artists, and and so I still feel highly involved with what's going on. Obviously, I've got 21-year-old son. For years, I've had all his mates coming around here. All his mates are DJs. They come around the house and see an 808 on the table and go, "What does your dad do?" Only in a London accent, not a Sheffield one. Um, you know, I, I listen to a lot of drill, funny enough, because I'm not too fond of the words, but I've got some good mates in Atlanta
Yeah.
in the trap scene. Send them over a few beats every so often. My advice to everybody isn't really any different. It's like you know, don't get fooled um, by the lights. Don't get dazzled by the lights. Don't
Yeah.
get drawn by the lights, and don't ever forget that whatever it is, um, you've got to be the best at it.
Yeah.
or you've got to strive to be the best, and you've got to be your own harshest critic, not necessarily in public. Um, I have this saying where I go, like, people go, "Oh, I've met this person; they're really talented." I'm like, get in the queue with all the other talented people.
Yeah.
It's like it's a big queue. So work out how to get yourself up there, and one of those is just be better, and then hope that you're going to be lucky. Um,
There's a million great songs, but it only takes one person to recognize one, doesn't it? And I think,
yeah,
it's a lottery, isn't it?
it's all kinds of things. I mean, like, there's a little side story to this. Out of the long picks, obviously, when the long picks came out, everybody had their money on Crispin. I mean, Crispin's one of my best friends, the lead singer and the writer. Um, and I speak to him a lot, and he's got had a co-writing career, and now he's big into music rights. But like, the star out of that band is Richard Hawley,
Yeah.
and and I love Rich, and we speak regularly, and who'd have thought it? I walked down, London Underground stations, and then there's all these posters up for his theatre show, in the West End. I love that stuff, and I love it because, um, especially Richard's earlier stuff, and that's not to put his later stuff down, but especially his early stuff, it was absolutely fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Um, Go away and be amazing, and then you got a lot better chance of being successful. I can't tell you anything. I'm not going to say, oh, do this and do that, but
Sure.
like, be amazing. And again, as I said before, if I was my advice for a new artist is find 10 fans, 50 fans, 100 fans, 200 fans, and like, don't be obsessed with this idea of trying to get these pointless, useless platforms where you pay, some money, and then you get an app, and what it is some rearranged pixels on a screen that tells you that you've been successful
Yeah.
because you've got more followers, and you haven't.
I
It's just
think
rearranged pixels on your screen.
those 50 people who you've cultivated who really love you are going to buy and pay for what you put out,
Yeah.
as opposed to 50,000 people who might have heard you on, a TikTok or something like that. And obviously, this isn't mutually exclusive and it's not a hard and fast rule, but those 50,000 people are going to forget about you pretty quickly. But 50 people who really connect with you and are prepared to put money down on, merchandise or buying a record or whatever, they're going to stick with you.
Yeah. I'm very excited about, it's not a new concept. It's the oldest concept we've got, but this idea of direct to fan.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's something where technology can actually play a great part in it.
Absolutely.
I'm building a thing at the moment called Indie ID, which is it's a validated identifier for an artist, and it's a way of combating this idea of, it's like if you're familiar with the idea of single sign-in, when you go from one platform to another platform without
Yeah.
having to enter your email and
Like
passwords.
LastPass and things like that.
Yeah, it's more like Auth0 or Zero Auth, whatever it's
Yep.
called. And so I'm working on that at the moment. And so people get this artist ID,
Okay.
and it enables you to log into music platforms like DistroKid and Amuse, and prove that you are a real human and not an AI. And you're also, because you've had to go through KYC, you are accountable to, and it's just a way of combating fraud and stopping the major label music groups from saying we can't pay these people because they're not real. Because
Sure.
so I'm still like, I still have a crazy pastime. I love finding a good API, and makes me happy when I get a good API and I can just sit there and mess around with somebody's API. I love it. But
That's great.
but technology for the right reasons. No biggies. I mean, I do have to say though that I once said this in a book somewhere that came out about the Comsats, is that I genuinely credit the bands with being the biggest influence on everything that I've done in music ever. What we did in those first formative years of battling it out in that room and doing it was the basis of like that was the imprint for me. And like, so, I have an eternal debt of gratitude to Mick, Steve, and Andy, you know, for that imprint, and
Yeah.
also for like, an amazing, like amazing, well, 8 years. I mean, even the shit years were still brilliant compared to like working at the Milk Marketing Board.
Yeah. Beats beats going in every Monday, doesn't it?
Yeah,
But
and you can still go to Spotify or whatever it is. Actually, I don't use Spotify that much nowadays, but you still go there and hear shit, and it's just like, yeah, so it's great. So I have no, in spite of the fact that I say didn't end as gracefully like most bands never do.
no.
But like, my eternal debt is with Mick, Steve, and Andy.
Well, I think that's a really lovely way to end this, Kevin. So I really thank you so much for your time and your insights. It's been really fascinating talking to you. Learned a lot about the Comsats today, and it was great to chat about sort of more contemporary things going on with technology and those sorts of things, because I work in marketing for a university, so they're on my radar all the time. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to try and get this out next week at some point, so I'll send you it when it's sort of edited
Hey,
and put together.
good
Thanks very
luck. I hope
much.
you continue to grow, and I hope this can be a small part of your growth.
Thank you for your time. Really
Pleasure.
pleasure talking to you.
All right. Thank you very much. See you later. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Well, what a fascinating episode that was. A great way to kind of reintroduce myself and reintroduce new musical chairs. The Comsats have been on my mind a lot recently, as is the increasing importance of finding new ways for artists to make money and market themselves. I love Kevin's no nonsense take on things, and hearing stories from his time in the Comsats through to, its latest work with app development. The one thing that's clear to me is that he's acutely aware of the engines behind the creative process. It's not enough to be talented, you've got to be smart too. The intro to this episode was taken from the Comsat Angels' The Eye Dance, with lyrics written by Stephen Fellows, music by the whole band. Comsat Angels could well be the most overlooked band of their era. That's up for debate, and I'm sure somebody in the comments will disagree with me, but that's what it's all about, right? Go and listen to them now. I'm Jay Cridford, and I will see you again soon. Take care.